Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and as people get signed in, if they have questions again, we'll probably revisit some of this at the end of class as well. If you have not gotten your principal, what is your assignment that was due this last week? I'm sorry. I'm like really off my game today. So your purposes of education paper, that first one was due Saturday. I know I've got a couple that have not gotten turned in yet. If you need to visit with me about that, please let me know so we can get that taken care of and get that in. There is a reflection paper that I'm showing due on Saturday that's kind of similar to like the cultural autobiography reflection that you did, just kind of reflecting back on maybe a couple groups of people that it might be difficult for you to work with. And if we need to adjust that down, we can. Would it be beneficial to move that assignment to be due next week instead of this week?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can definitely do that. But I do want you to start thinking about what groups would be difficult for you to work with. And you may not even really realize that it would be that difficult until you actually start thinking about some of these different groups and what kind of interactions you might have with them. A lot of times it's something very simple and you're just like, I don't know anything about the beliefs for a particular group or some of the social norms for that particular group, and just write a little bit about what parts of it would be difficult for you. Some of the examples that you might do is like, maybe working with parents of your students that are the parents that are addicts. You'll have students, sometimes they'll have parents that are alcoholics, or maybe they are some other type of substance user. Those ones might be difficult to work with. It may be difficult for you to work with somebody who's from a different religion or a different ethnicity, and just really kind of looking into where those difficulties might come from. Um, like I said, sometimes it might just be more because of an unknown, or you're just unfamiliar, and how you can work on maybe getting more familiar with it, or how you can go about working towards some of that bias that you might have. And then we do have another paper. It's not due, well, I guess I shouldn't call it a paper, it's a project. That's due like the beginning of November. That original project, I'm gonna go here and pull that up real quick. At least I think so. Give me 1 second here and I'll get that pulled up just so we can kind of look at that. Because there's a few things we might want to change. Okay, so the one that's coming up at the beginning of November is when it would be due, and it's the stories of schooling in the US. Originally, this was intended to be a group research project and presentation. So I do want to check with you all here in just a few on whether or not you'd like to keep this as a group project or if you'd like to switch it to individual. And then I'm also going to want to see if you would prefer to do it in a presentation format like we did with the cultural autobiographies, or if we want to do something more like a discussion board with it. So we will talk about that here in just a few minutes. But with this particular one, you are going to be identifying a group that has been marginalized in schools, or in education in general. And you're going to research it and see where it started, where it's been, where it's at now. And you're going to present that information either through, you could do it through like a PowerPoint, or I know we've seen a presentation, any type of media would be fine. And incorporating like video clips in there, just kind of whatever would work. If we do this as a discussion board type format, you can present a PowerPoint and include video clips in there. I'm not sure if any of you had been able to go in and look at the example that's in here. Let me get to it real quick. For this particular example that they did, oh, evidently I need to clear my thing. So on here, they did one about why women are underrepresented in education. Several slides, incorporated a video clip inside of there, and just gave out a bunch of information. And then went into some things that maybe are a little bit more disturbing for some. So definitely taking a look at how that particular presentation was done would give you an idea, but that is not necessarily exactly what you would need to do. Does anybody have any questions about that particular assignment? All right. I do want to check with you and see what your preferences are as far as an individual assignment or as a group, and then which way you'd like to have us do the presentations for those. So let me go ahead and pull up. Okay, so I'm going to put the polling up there. And you can all see, hopefully you can all see the different polls where which would you prefer to do this project, or would you prefer to do this project as an individual or a group? Keeping in mind, I know it's going to be difficult for some for group, but we can definitely see about working through that, whether it be setting up breakout rooms during class to work as your group, given each group their own Zoom link or whatever is going to work, we can work around that. And then how you want to present that final project, if it's in a presentation format or if it's more in a discussion board format. So I'll give you a couple minutes to go through and answer those.
If we do it as a group, how big will the groups be?
The groups will probably be about 3 to 5 people.
Okay.
I always find polling to be extremely interesting, especially when it comes out almost even in every aspect. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Just so everyone kind of has an idea, it's pretty much split on whether or not people want to do individual projects or group projects. There's a fair chunk that were like, either one is fine. A presentation format was the most popular out of a discussion board format. So that was interesting as well. Here, we can even share those so everyone can see. Can everybody see those results right there? Just so you can kind of see how the rest of your class might be leaning. Now I know, like I talked before, it could be difficult for some to do an individual or to do a group project just because they're not in Laramie at the moment. So even with that being said, we can work around some of that as well. And I'll make some changes to that assignment and we'll kind of go from there to see what it might look like. But like I said, I can always, if you're doing it as a group, or if we do the whole thing as a group, and you are not able to do like a Zoom link to where everybody could meet together on Zoom, or you can't get together in person, I can always set up those Zoom links for you as well. So those will be things that we'll be looking at going forward, because I definitely want to give you plenty of time to work on that assignment. That one's a little bit more bulky, so to speak. And it is one of those core assignments that everybody that takes any section of this class would have to take. So any questions on any of that?
I guess for like in a group, what's the plan on like how to present? With just one person screen share, or like how would you anticipate that working?
It could be as one person would be doing the screen share and the other members of the group would just do their speaking at that time. Kind of like when we had a couple of the presentations where the presentation was sent to me and I screen shared it, and then the person presenting spoke and just told me when to change the slide. So it could definitely be done like that. All right, if any other questions come up on that particular assignment or any other ones, please don't hesitate to let me know. Which then brings us to today's topic with all of the Supreme Court cases. I'm curious as to what everyone knows about the different Supreme Court cases. Does anybody know much about, well, what about Mendez versus Westminster? Does anybody know anything about that particular one? So I believe for that particular one, so that one actually was not a Supreme Court case. So that particular case was actually through the Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco. And it was the first in which a federal court found segregation of students based on race is by itself a violation of the 14th Amendment. And that one kind of came about due to school districts in Orange County, California, assigning students of Mexican descent to separate schools. And then, so that happened in 1947. It wasn't until 1954 that Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka came about. What is known about Brown versus Board of Education?
That's where separate but equal was ruled as inherently unequal, and that was the landmark for the excuse of, well, they're just keeping separate, but they have the same quality, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly. How's I guess I'm kind of curious as to what people's feelings are on, were those schools really truly equal?
I mean,
Really?
well, no, because you also see the black restrooms and the or like the colored restrooms and the colored water fountains, and there's a noticeable difference in quality. It was they weren't even trying to look like it was equal. It was just blatantly, and then yeah, it was blatantly unequal just by through looks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what else? Kristen, I know you had something you were gonna say.
It was pretty similar to that. The whites only areas were better funded and therefore nicer than the places that were designated for people of color.
Okay. Any other thoughts and comments about board versus or Brown versus Board of Education? Okay, it was definitely, I mean, obviously it's one of the most famous cases since it's the one everybody does typically know and will refer back to. Um, Definitely something very fascinating and yet kind of disheartening in a lot of ways that this happened. What we're going on almost 70 years ago, and honestly, we're probably still struggling with this. Um, so that's kind of disheartening there. So after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, in 1958, there was Cooper versus Aaron. And in this particular one, the court unanimously rejects the efforts by the governor and legislature of Arkansas to delay the Little Rock School District's plan to desegregate Central High School because of public hostility to the plan. So obviously we can tell a lot of people were not happy about desegregation, and it was causing a lot of concern. Um, so that was in 1958. And then in 1968, so we had a 10-year gap there before Green versus New Kent County School Board came about. And this one was expressing frustration with the pace of desegregation in the South since Brown. Because obviously Brown happened 14 years prior to this, and we were still having an issue. How much of an issue would that cause for any of you, knowing that something needed to change and here's 14 years later and it's still not done?
Well, I mean, some of those kids probably like were already out of school. Like they went through their entire school career with no change when they're
Exactly.
supposed to change.
That could be pretty frustrating, probably especially for some of those parents that were really pushing for this change to happen. And as we kind of saw in the clip last week, that particular mom really wanted the best for her child. And if they'd have been experiencing that back in like 1954 to 1968, her kids would not have had the option to go to 3 different middle schools to get the services that each one needed. So it kind of makes me wonder what would have happened to those kids. Would they have made it through school? Would they have ended up dropping out? Would they have been successful? You know, what would have happened?
Cinder, it's okay. I'll move. Cinder, do you need to move?
So then after Green versus New Kent County School Board, so that was 1968. So 1971 was our next one, which was Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education. So this one is best remembered for authorizing cross-district busing of students. So this decision also gives federal district courts a broad array of other desegregation tools, including the assignment of teachers to achieve racial diversity in schools, the use of racial quotas as a starting point for achieving student assignment goals, and the altering of attendance zones, including the pairing or clustering of schools. This one I don't even know very much about. I don't think I'd even heard of it until looking over this section. But there's a picture here of a school bus. It says that the 16-year-old Cindy Grayson drove this school bus across town to West Charlotte High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, as schools opened under a desegregation plan requiring the busing of thousands of students to achieve integration. But no one rode her bus. An organization of parents opposed to busing had threatened to boycott Charlotte and Mecklenburg County's public schools. Can you imagine driving a bus and having no students at all on there? I mean, there's times I always liked when the bus was a little on the empty side because it was a little bit quieter, but I mean, that would be something. I don't know. I'd probably even take that a little personally, like nobody wanted to be on my bus.
I mean, yeah, that just seems depressing. And at some point, you would have to wonder, like, is it just a waste that you're driving this bus that nobody's on?
Right. Imagine the fuel costs associated with that. I mean, we know those buses do not get good gas mileage, especially not in 1971. So yeah, so that was another one. And then 2 years after that was Keys versus School District Number 1. And this particular one, a desegregation case from the Denver School District, so a little bit closer to all of us, led to several firsts for the Supreme Court. The first finding of a dual system outside of the southern and border states. Its first case involving discrimination against Hispanic as well as Black students, and the first in which there had not been de jure segregation or segregation required by law. So the court holds that a finding of segregative intent by the school board involving one portion of the district meant the burden was on the district to prove that the whole system was not affected by the segregation. So pretty much here was, if it happens in one school in the school district, then they're assuming that it's happening all across the board. Do you feel that that's a fair assumption, or is that reaching?
I feel like it could depend on how big the school districts are. I mean,
Okay.
Laramie County School District at the high school level is only 3 schools.
True.
But a school district in California is probably like 50. So
Right.
I don't know where the, like, what number it becomes like maybe more accurate, but I feel like for smaller school districts it could be more reasonable.
Okay. So it looks like, just on the picture that I'm seeing on this timeline, it looks like they put 22 of the city's 121 public schools in bus-oriented integration programs. So that one to me feels like quite a few schools in that particular school district, if there was 121 public schools. And they put 22 of those on a busing type program. But yeah, so that one's kind of interesting. And that one's a lot closer to home. I mean, Denver's not that far away. So I was in 73.
I have a
Oh,
question.
yeah.
What is a like dual system? What does that mean?
That's actually, that's a good question. Let's look at that. Let's see. I almost might have to do a little bit more research on this particular one. I don't know if it's saying that it's a dual system because it's outside of the South and the border states. I know most of the desegregation laws were focused more in southern states because we knew that's where the majority was happening. But this one was more central. And they were actually, it looks like it was discrimination against Hispanics as well as Black students. So I don't know if it has something to do with that part or not. But I'll make a note to look some more into that one, Brock, because that's a really good question. And I don't know the answer to that.
That's okay. Thank you, though.
Uh-huh. Okay. So then our next case was Milliken versus Bradley in 1974. So this was right after the last one. And this one was in the first major retreat in its desegregation jurisprudence. The court strikes down a multi-district plan that would have brought together the Detroit school system with 53 outlying districts. The justices said that unless the other districts could be shown to have committed a constitutional violation, they could not be included in an interdistrict plan. So that's another one I think I would almost have to look at a little bit more, just because I don't know a lot about that particular one either. Does anybody have any background information on Milliken versus Bradley? Okay, yeah, that's definitely one. I'm not sure what was going on there. And then we jump from 1974 clear to 1991. That's a huge gap with nothing happening. And that one brought about the Oklahoma City Board of Education versus Dowell. So this is where the court stressed that desegregation decrees were not meant to operate in perpetuity. It holds that district courts should determine whether school districts had complied with such a decree in good faith for a reasonable period of time and had eliminated the vestiges of past discrimination to the extent practicable. Okay, that was a mouthful. So to me, that one kind of sounds a little bit like those decrees were not meant to be long-standing, and as long as they addressed it to a point that was reasonable, that they didn't have to worry about it anymore. So I guess I question, does that mean once they've done desegregation for a long enough period, does that mean they can go back to what they were doing before, or will they have gotten into a habit of maintaining that desegregation? Any thoughts on that? I know that one's definitely a tough one.
I think that one's kind of interesting because, like, what we talked about last week, how they're kind of starting to segregate schools a little bit more. That's just kind of interesting that came up.
Yeah, that one kind of fits in with that one quite a bit. A lot of similarities.
I think it's interesting because like I feel like it's sort of saying I don't know, I understand like they're saying that these laws were not made to be something that lasts forever, right? But I feel like that's going on the assumption that like if we fix segregation, if segregation is no longer a problem, then racism is no longer a problem, which isn't exactly isn't exactly true. So I feel like that's kind of like an assumption in this law or in this ruling.
That's a good point, Brock. It does kind of say that exact thing, you know, desegregation's not an issue, so racism is not either, and we can all go about our merry way when we're all very aware that that's not the whole truth. So our next case was just a year later, Freeman versus Pitts, where the justices hold that district courts may relinquish supervision of desegregation plans in incremental stages, such as over faculty desegregation while retaining it in other areas, such as student assignment. So this one sounds like, okay, we can cut back parts of this, but we can't just eliminate these decrees all at once. It has to be done in stages. Which I'm curious, what are some thoughts on doing it in stages versus all at once?
I mean, the reason Little Rock was so like had so much tension is because it was a sudden change and the president had to send the National Guard down in there because there were literal riots. And even though it is law, if the public doesn't like it, you're going to have a hard time enforcing it. So you really got to wean the public into it and sometimes wait for a generation to sometimes die off or move away in order to really progress. And that's unfortunately just the way I think that it sometimes has to be.
People don't really do change very well, do they? And especially something that's been the norm for probably most of the public's natural life. I mean, they've not known anything different, and to suddenly change it, and then to kind of start easing some of those restrictions, I would definitely say in stages is definitely better. Okay, so then after that one is Missouri versus Jenkins. So they gave us a couple years here to 1995. And in Missouri versus Jenkins, the court holds that a plan creating a magnet program for the Kansas City, Missouri School District designed to attract white students from the suburbs and increase teachers and staff salaries exceeds the remedial powers of the district court. Further, a district court may not withhold a finding of unitary or legally desegregated status based on a school system substandard test scores. Thoughts on that one?
So is this just saying that like the court is saying that they don't have the power, or at least the remedial powers to make a decision on that? Is that what it was saying?
It kind of sounds like it. I mean, it looks like, so they had a plan to create a magnet school. specifically designed to attract white students. Maybe.
Well, if that's the case, then who has that power? Like, you know,
Right?
who's making those decisions?
Is that like a Supreme Court decision? Since it's like, I just looked up what remedial powers are because I don't know what that is. It said, the very first thing says something that like a law that acts as like a remedy.
Okay.
So I wonder if like that means that it would be too, like a decision like this would be too big for the court.
Potentially too big for a district court where it might need to go to a higher court. That might be. Yeah, that one's an interesting one too. I'd have to, a lot of these I would really have to like dig into, and I don't know if I understand like case law and that stuff well enough to have a full understanding of that particular one.
Yeah. So would a district court correlate with like school districts? I don't know if that's even makes sense, but like, is that like this? Would they be on the same level, or is a district court like a small little tiny court?
No,
that
it's a
is-
little bit bigger. Go ahead, Kyle.
So a district court is just your local area. They kind of like go like more like just this like how things are divided into counties and stuff like that. The same thing goes with court systems. It's divided into different circuit courts. It can also depending on what it is, it depends on what type of court system you go into. Something like this may start off in the circuit court, but if people push it, it will get pushed all the way up past to the state court through a federal court. And in this, when I'm looking at this thing, it kind of says like they try to raise the state like a tax, but the state law wouldn't allow that to happen. So they brought it up to the Supreme Court. So it's just one of those things where you just have to be careful about like certain courts will be able to do certain things. So like the federal courts, I believe took the reins of this because it was affecting state law. And if it was to affect one state, what's to say another state's not going to join it? So federal law will always triumph over state law. So say, for example, state law says that you can't, just for example purposes, you can't have more than just an ounce of weed on you without being felony. But federal law says that if you have more than 2 ounces, it's a felony. Depending on your state, which like California versus Wyoming, like and stuff like that, it's a lot different. So California laws are a lot different versus Wyoming laws. Possession of stuff like a controlled substance in Denver is different than Wyoming. So you got to be careful about what's going on. But if you really know your legal stuff and your laws, you say like the federal law states this, which means I don't have to get fined or be processed for state law. So it's just one of those things where it's really complex, but I have an understanding of how some things that work, but it's just different. You just gotta have to pay attention.
There's so many different courts out there where different things go, but your district court is definitely one of your higher ones within the state. You're like more, what's the word? I'm not even sure what the word is I'm looking for. Like those that are having like huge felony charges being brought up against them would be more in a district court versus a misdemeanor charge, which would be in more of a municipal or circuit court.
And just so people do know that there are 2 different Supreme Courts. There's a federal Supreme Court and state Supreme Court. So how it kind of works is in like federal courts, you have the United States Bankruptcy Court, and then it goes up to United States District Court, and then it goes up to the United States Court of Appeals or Court of Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court for federally, and then the state courts, you have your state Court of Appeals and your state court, state Supreme Court. So depending on which one you're trying to go against, depends on which one you want. The federal Supreme Court is greater than the state Supreme Court. So if you want to change a law in the state, then it will be the state Supreme Court. But if you want a national one, it has to be federal. Make sense?
Mhm. Okay. So that all happened in 1995 where they were attempting to do that. And then we had quite a break to 2007 where parents involved in community schools versus the Seattle School District. And in this particular case, the justices strike down student assignment plans involving the voluntary consideration of race in two school systems that had either never been under court supervision for desegregation or had been declared unitary and released from supervision. The districts did not meet their burden of showing that their interest in promoting diversity justified their individual consideration of students' race, the court holds. So if I'm understanding this one correctly, it sounds like they tried to give separate assignments based on race. Which, I mean, I guess I can probably see some pros and cons to this, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. Or maybe nope, I'm totally misreading that. Based on where they're going to assign those students to which schools.
What was the court case again?
Parents' involvement in community schools versus the Seattle School District.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that one's more about where they were going to assign those students to go to school.
Is it saying that like the students could, like the parents or the students, I guess, would voluntarily give their race, and then the school districts with that information would then place students? Is that what that's saying?
Possibly.
Okay, I figured it out here.
Okay, good.
What's going on is that there was too many students going to certain schools for their first choice, and the districts use a tiebreaker to decide which students should be admitted to the popular schools. And like the tiebreaker was kind of like the racial factor intended to maintain the racial diversity. So that's what it was going for. It was like 40% white students versus 60% non-white students. So they were trying to balance it out based on race. So they wanted certain percentages of it to be white students and non-white students be a certain percentage. So they show they had that different types of equality. So it was affecting kind of everybody in this little scenario, because using
Okay.
race to figuring out like, hey, our schools have like, it's a diverse school versus a majority of a white school. So they were trying to do that instead. So they were trying to keep things segregated based on race to include whites and non-white students. So it's kind of one of those laws that's kind of like, in my opinion, that's stupid. Like if you're forcing people off just by their race, that's still racism,
Yeah, they definitely probably needed to come up with a better way to like cap the attendance at that school. Feel like your schools only have so much capacity and then that school is considered full. But it sounds like from what Kyle just shared with us, they were using race as their way of deciding who gets in and who does not, instead of using things like who has siblings here, who lives in this neighborhood, who, those types of things versus race, because we cannot discriminate due to race. And that's actually, I think, like the the last one that's in this little timeline that's in your WIO courses. But it seems like it's constantly going. Even after what we had watched last week, it's like, well, it's still kind of happening. Makes me kind of feel like it's never going to go away. And those things are important to know going into education, just because you do need to know where different laws have gone and where the courts have ruled. And that can also help determine, you know, how your school views education and what's important for them. Any thoughts on school desegregation? It's definitely an ongoing battle. Okay, I think we talked about all of those. Did anybody have the time to watch any of the links for the Supreme Court case sessions for Brown versus Board of Education? They were pretty long. Not gonna lie, they were a little long. I will say, like in the first one, I believe so Linda Brown Thompson, who was the daughter of Brown in Brown versus Board of Education, she recalls this starting actually in 1950 versus 1954, but it didn't go to court until 1954. But she does recall having to walk or be bused, which I think she says like 2 miles, but like when she had to walk and it was so cold that she couldn't, you know, for her, she couldn't always make it to school because it was just too cold to get there. But this was what was required when she first started going to school, which prompted her dad to join in this case against the school district or the Board of Education. If you get an opportunity to look at some of these, please do. They've got them all broken down. There's like several different Supreme Court cases. Not all of them are based on schools or in segregation, but there's definitely some very interesting ones in here if you have the opportunity to watch those. So that was just really kind of like a broad overview of all the different court cases that happen within the schools. Is there any questions or comments or thoughts on any of those? All right. One other thing I forgot to ask at the beginning of class, and I want to check with you all. Have you all been able to access things that have been published on WIO courses, or have there been times when you've gone in there to look at something and like the link's broken or any other issues that you've had with WIO courses? Okay. I just wanted to check. I know I get an email every now and then that states all these links are broken. And when I go in, they're not broken when I check them. So I wanted to check with you all and see if you had any problems. I know there are a lot of courses that are having all sorts of issues. And I guess there were some updates to WIO courses in Canvas over like the summer and this first part of this semester. So if you do run into any problems, please let me know. Also, if you've not had a chance to turn in your purposes of education paper, please get that into me as soon as possible. I will start getting those graded and back to you as soon as possible. I will move the due date for the cultural bias paper to next weekend, and have that taken care of so that you don't have to have 2 papers back to back. That wasn't very nice of me. And it's not very nice to myself either, because I'd have to read all of those all at once. And then I'm going to work on kind of changing up the stories of school assignment, so we have a little bit more play with that, and then we'll continue talking about what that one's going to look like and give you opportunities to work on that project before it's due. Any questions or concerns? So I know class is a lot shorter today than what it has been lately, but take some time for yourself, work on something that you've got to get done. Try to stay healthy, stay out of the smoke if you're in Laramie. And yeah, and don't get exposed. Do your best. Don't get sick, if at all possible.
Oh,
Yes.
after Zoom, I gotta tell you about my job so that way you know why I'm not in class.
Okay, that is fine. If you want to just stay on until after everyone else has gotten off, we can have a conversation then if you'd like.
Okay.
All right. If anybody needs anything, please just let me know, and we'll see you Thursday.
Can I just ask, just because
Yes.
I don't